Hey, welcome back to Cards and Comics, and today I've got a video for you going over one of the earliest, and I think it's one of the bigger PSA scandals that nobody really has a lot of familiarity with in recent times because it was kept so quiet, and it's definitely one of those scandals that if you weren't around in 2002, 2003, you weren't very aware of it because, again, PSA has done a good job of keeping this exact issue under wraps. So um, the actual issue came out with a company called When It Was a Game, and the slang used in the hobby was Wiwag. And When It Was a Game was owned by two people, John Slight and Craig Kreider, and they were out of San Diego, California, and they were well-known dealers who, bought, would go around and buy vintage cards, newer cards, and they were known for their auctions. So they did a phone auction and then later an online auction, and so they ran auctions, they were dealers, they were really active in buying and selling cards. Now they were also known by dealers, and I've talked to some dealers, and if you read some of the stories about them on the message boards back in the day, they also had a reputation for maybe altering cards as well. You can definitely see that one of the members of owners of WeWag later on, has also had a history, or at least been accused of doing some card alterations, and I'll show you that some of that evidence too. But in the end, these guys were considered legitimate dealers and were very active with PSA. So in 2002, they had charges filed against them for committing mail fraud. Um, and this issue was very was a lot bigger than what's ever been really reported, in my opinion. This issue actually affected me and my father as well because we collected at the time together, and we actually had done a lot of deals with When It Was a Game. My first graded PSA card came from them, and we had done maybe 20 to 30 deals over the history of our relationship with them, over a 5, 6 year period. And so, they were, a dealer we trusted and sold cards and bought from. And, having this happen was really discouraging, especially since we had probably so many cards eventually, used in this scheme to hurt other collectors. Um, so the scheme was like this. Um, what they did was, if you read this report, it says that basically that they were inserting inferior cards. So they would take a card like a PSA 10, open the holder, and replace the card with a PSA 8 or a lower graded version of that copy. Then they would take the higher grade copy and send it back in, and then repeat the process. However, it was a little bit more sophisticated than that. If you really know, if you go through the story and talk to dealers and people who actually were in court, during some of these proceedings, you'll find out that actually When It Was a Game had actually stolen holders from PSA, had bought a sonic welding machine, and was actually taking the flips and putting them in brand new holders that were PSA holders, and basically and kind of creating brand new slabs. And so instead of having these frosty slabs, which in the old days that was always something you looked at, is the holder frosty, because that could indicate the card was tampered with, and then super glue or something else was used to put the holder back together. That's not, they may have done that early on, but once they stole or found a way to get those holders from PSA, and you'll find out later PSA actually had the holders mailed to them and evidently just left them in the lobby or outside their door at their headquarters. And so that I think that's an interesting security issue when you're dealing with the ability to turn those holders into millions of dollars. I think it's a little bit of an issue. And then the second issue with PSA around this time period was the fact that the holders were able to be tampered with like this, and this was sort of an easy process to do. In fact, one of the major concerns after this issue was whether or not PSA should change their holder. And so going through so the first part is sort of PSA's response, notifying consumers that there is an issue, and that to replace the card you have to contact them, and they will either find a replacement card for you or you'll get a refund. And so this was around 2003. Now this is an FBI, and the state of California actually was the one that brought action. So contrary to popular belief, is PSA did not sue or was not the plaintiff in this case. It was the state of California. So, and if you go into SCD, which is Sports Collectors Digest, here is it's kind of a summary of an article from that time period. And there's some interesting things in this article. If you read it, is that if you talk to, so PSA President Joe Orlando, who's still in charge of PSA, stated it had virtually no effect on the business, and that collectors felt like the system worked and that they didn't get away with this. Some of the quotes, which really isn't that true. Even back in this time period, the key question, if you go to this part of the article, is the key question was there wasn't any specific answer given to how many of these Wiwag switch cards are in circulation. And to this day, I have never seen that list, and evidently PSA has some sort of list of those cert numbers that were possibly affected, but they don't have, according to the article, they didn't have a count of how many cards had been sent in or how many cards were affected. So the short of this is that those cards, theoretically, they're still in circulation. And in fact, I know of a few times where people have actually found a pretty awful looking 8 or 9 card, and then they brought it to PSA's attention, and they found out later is that it was a Wiwag card, and that it's actually a lower a grade or a misgrade. I guess today would be considered a misgrade in PSA. I don't know what they do with those cards, but I do know that they don't want them in circulation. So I think they would work with the person to try to get them out of circulation, because it hurts their reputation to have PSA 6s in a PSA 8 or 9 holder. So some of the things in this article was also, what we talked about was, the holder, right? And so what Joe Orlando said about the holder was, we don't feel the holder is susceptible. The holders are intended to be tamper evident, not tamper proof. If the holder security didn't work, we wouldn't have been able to catch them. Now, to a lot of people, this is just crap. In all honesty, there is no, there's no way that this is actually the case. Because these holders at the time, and if you look at early PSA holders, they were fairly easy to open, and so there was an issue. In fact, PSA has modified their holder many times, and in fact, the new holders, the lighthouse holders, or however you want to call them, they're much sturdier. They're much harder to get into, and so I think they knew that there was an issue. They just never want to admit it. And again, this is a theme of PSA, is that they never admit fault or that there was ever an issue. I mean, they said there was no issue with the holder, there was no issue with confidence, the system worked, when in reality is that, they never published how many people were affected. They never really addressed, the holder issue at the time. So it just shows that, they're not the most forthcoming when there's issues. They're idea is to try to just not address it. So some other insights here into the story is, So, for the hobby itself, unfortunately, the common theme that we have in the hobby is that these issues, tend to come back around, and so do the people. And so John Slight, who was one of the owners of Wiwag, and this was from Blowout Forums, he started a new company called San Diego Collectibles, and anyone who collects a lot of vintage cards will recognize the name because he's very active on eBay. And San Diego, you know, again, here is the actual letter from the district attorney, or the District of California, where this case was actually tried, from the United States Attorney. And the thing that was funny about this is the card that got them caught was a serial number Bonzi Wells. So of all cards that would catch a sophisticated fraud ring, it was Bonzi Wells, and it was because they used the same card to create multiple certs, and so it's very easy to see that one card had a serial number, and now it's in a different holder of the same grade, and nobody's going to take a PSA 10 card and have it regraded multiple times. So it was very easy to catch them at that point, and so they got sloppy. And I think it's interesting that that's the card that caught them. But going into this kind of issue with the owners of John Slight, if you go into what happened, the aftermath is, if you read here, that the sin scene was probation, with both defendants paying $3,000 each, and the corporation paying $6,000, and they were obligated to pay through 2005. So for 2 years, you had the opportunity to get a refund or get a new card, but in all they paid $12,000 total in fines, and were given probation. So really a slap on the wrist, considering that they were making probably millions of dollars on these kind of cards at the time. Now, going back to John Slight for a minute, in San Diego Collectibles. So here is a lot of evidence from blowout forums of card tampering, of trimming, of flip corners, and and I think it's you can look at the photo evidence. They're using the photo matching, and you can make your own conclusions. I'm not going to tell you if this is 100% true. I do think that there is some definitely smoke and fire here, and I do think that on some of these cases they're definitely onto something. And so I would say, like, the fact that John Slight's career has been to work in this industry and not be honest. So I would lean towards the side that this is probably more of could be a more real issue than not, because of just the fact that he committed fraud as a past owner of a company. And I think one of the cards that's kind of more egregious is this Pete Rose that goes from a 6 to a 9. And I think this is just, it's not good for the hobby for this kind of things to happen. But the fact that he can form a new company and sell in this industry again shows that there's not a lot of protection, consumer protection, for these folks, for us, as consumers, because you can commit fraud, you can be convicted, and go back, start a new company, sell collectibles, and you're fine. You can, be a dealer again. And I think it's, in other industries, this would not be allowed to be convicted of fraud in your own industry and then go back and be a member of it, without any sort of disclosure to anyone that you have a history of this kind of behavior. So going back to, some of the things that came out. So another footnote to this story is that there's a company called Real Legends who had basically a partnership with When It Was a Game. And that partnership was kind of fostered through PSA connections. PSA introduced the companies together. And so when this hit, Real Legends sued PSA for basically not disclosing that there was these issues going on with When It Was a Game. They felt they knew based on documents and records. And PSA did settle for $600,000. And if you read some of the message board chatter from Net54, for people who actually were in the court during this trial, and some people actually on Net54 were witnesses, but they talked about PSA wouldn't admit that they had resealed or had basically stolen the holders and sealed them, when in the courtroom, and they denied that there was even a sealing machine that was used by when it was a game, and they actually wheeled in the machine to prove to PSA that they actually had the machine that Wiwag had used to fake these cards. And so it just shows that PSA was in denial the whole time that they actually did these things. And when they were even given proof, they've never admitted that there was been reholdered or freshly holdered cards that were basically fraudulent in a PSA holder. They've always maintained that they were tampered with holders, not new holders. So it's just another thing, to show that if you read right here that that Wiwag didn't have a shielding game. It was funny because the machine was actually wheeled into the courtroom, and then it talks about how they left holders unprotected outside that that when it was a game was able just to steal and use to help fund this operation. Now, so at the end of the day, how did it affect me? Well, firstly, I had done a lot of deals, so we talked about that. But there was one card in particular. It was a 1958 Clemente PSA 8 that I was really excited to get. I made a lot of deals. Sold a lot of cards to or traded a lot of cards to these guys to be able to get it. And at the time I was not making a lot of money, so this was like a huge deal for me. Like it was like the best Clemente card I had at the time. And it was such a terrible card. They really doctored the photos to hide all the errors and issues of the card. It was just full of print, just ugly card. Not what I expected, and then they wouldn't take it back. When I was dissatisfied because it was a trade, and so it was really disappointing. I really that was my last real dealing with them. I didn't realize until years later at a show, because I didn't go to a lot of shows back then, that this issue. So it was past 2005 when you could actually get restitution. Since all my deals with when it was a game was basically through the phone or in person, there was no eBay transaction, so I never was even notified. Like these other folks were, that there was an issue. So I didn't see the notice on PSA's website. I wasn't submitting a lot of cards myself at the time, so I didn't really go to their website very often, and so I didn't know. And I think that's just awful for someone who had done a lot of dealings with this company to not even be notified that you possibly were defrauded. The second thing is, why I was dealing with them a lot was because they would give more trade in than the cards were worth. So if I was dealing with these guys, they would give you $2,000 trade in for a $1,500 card. And they were very aggressive about giving you cards that were worth a lot more than they were on eBay or in person, like at a show. So like a good example was like an 86 Topps traded, Barry Bonds. That card at one point was selling for $1,000, even more. And, they would give it to you in a trade for $500. So you could double your money, right? But it's because they were putting PSA 7 cards in a 10 holder. And so they were generating tons of these fake 10s. And to them, they had like $30-$40 in the card, and they were selling it to me for 500. And I would go out and, I know I sold those cards or traded them to other dealers, and, unknowingly, screwed over some other collectors. And that makes me feel bad knowing that all this was happening, and really, I think very few people got full restitution. And so I think, and the cards are still in the environment, still in the hobby. So, and, in the end, just not a great resolution. And it's one of those issues that PSA really hasn't really ever come clean on. So, so at the end, what I like just for everyone to remember is that, These things happen in this hobby. These things repeat. So even today, we're seeing fake holders and counterfeits and issues and trim cards still having their effect on the hobby. And so in 20 years, it's still the same way. So I think you have to protect yourself. Know that if you see a PSA 8 that looks really terrible and maybe it's in an older holder, it might be one of these cards. And so these things are still in the marketplace. So just protect yourself and just keep in mind that these companies like PSA are not on your side always. They want to protect themselves and their own business versus helping the consumer. A good example of that is not publishing the list of cards and then not changing the holder immediately when this issue is found. So I think this is good examples of kind of PSA style of dealing with issues is to ignore it and try to hide it. Um, so just wanted to share a story with you guys. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully it's maybe something you hadn't heard of before. But it's definitely one of their biggest scandals. And I think now that there's some other scandals recently with the trim card issues that we can just kind of as hobbyists just be informed. So all right guys, so I'll see you next time and be safe and happy collecting.